God-given, and it's also
Day. It's never been
putting the squeeze. They make money on
excessive materialism and militarism. We know full well that racism is still that hound of hell.
Opportunities like fast, and I know some people have claimed like that is pretty close to how it happened for him, so obviously it's possible. It's just, you know, 99% of comics, it's not that. It's you're grinding, and yeah, you might get a show, like a cool show here or there, but then, you know, and again, the other thing is it all depends. Some people start out real hot, and you know, and it keeps going up, or you start out 3-4 years and you don't catch on till like 5, 6, 7, you know. So yeah, it's not a hard and fast rule, but most comics you talk to say crashing's obviously a dramatization and exaggeration on being a comic.
I was sad they canceled it. I mean, I kind of figured they would after the Artie Lang thing happened again, and I think that kind of ruined the show. Ruined? Is that the right word? I don't think it is.
Well,
yeah, but you know, it gave it bad press.
Which is, well, I mean, it's funny because Artie Lang comes in with that's always been him and always been his character. It's so interesting but the show that I find also very fascinating and gets a lot of criticism on that end is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Oh, I actually haven't watched that, and I know
you don't have to. I mean, again, it's another romanticized take on being stand-up comedy, especially for the time period, and especially like the way they sort of have that show take place. It's like a very well designed show, and it's like the sets, and it's like beautiful to watch, but like after the first season I was like, I can't watch this anymore. It was just like too much, and it was really just about like them trying to act like her character is like very well off and comes from like a very wealthy family, and then she's, you know, then she pursues stand-up comedy, and they basically just are like, yeah, it's the 50s, but like the toughest thing is being a woman, not being black or anything, but being a woman. And you're just like, well, it is, but also you guys can't just like gloss over this other stuff. Like they touch on it like in one episode for like a second, and then they're like, okay, check, we did it, and then they move on. They're like, that was cool. Now they go into the fun stuff.
White feminism at work.
It's a tricky thing. It is indeed.
How long have you been in comedy?
I've been in comedy now just a little over 3 years, which is, again, I'm sort of still at like what a lot of people would consider like beginner, which is fine. I mean, there's a lot of people that, again, there's no hard and fast rule of what a path is, but yeah, I'd say within anything under 5 years, people kind of consider you're still a rookie. But I feel good with my pace and where I'm at, but yeah.
How did you find yourself in comedy?
I started out because I work in television, and I have a background in writing and producing, directing and stuff like that. So there came a point where I always kind of like thought about it. I had taken improv classes because when I first started out, for a short time I was a puppeteer. Not that I planned on being one, it just sort of, the job was kind of like a dual role. And I was puppeteering, and I was taking improv classes for that. And then there came a point where I thought about doing stand-up comedy, but I was in Philadelphia. And not that it's impossible, it's just at the time it was hard to get into an open mic, or it was easier to actually get into an improv class or a show than it was to do stand-up. And then when I got to New York, I was like still thinking about it. And I think it finally came to a point where I was just like, I wanted to do something outside of work where I was just writing my own stuff.
Yeah.
And I think part of it too is the whole representation thing, where I was like, complaining about like there's not enough Asians on TV. And then it was one of those stupid things where it was like, oh, wait a minute, my face, I'm Asian. Maybe I should stop complaining.
I should put my face on TV.
Yeah, maybe I should just try and see what happens. And I think it was partially like I'm so used to wanting to be behind the camera, and that's where I feel most comfortable, that and the whole like listening to your own voice, for instance, like this a couple years ago, I've been like, oh, no way. So once you get comfortable with that, then I felt like, okay, this feels good because I feel like I am still writing and I'm finding a different skill set. And yeah, so I think it was all those things. And finally I took like a stand-up class and then started, which was really just, for anyone thinking of taking a class, it's interesting. Like all you really learn is just the rules, the bare bones rules of like comedy rooms, clubs, like a little bit of the structure. But they can't teach you how to be funny. They can't teach you how to be good. They can only just give you at least to say, here's how you don't look like a complete idiot when you go into a room, or here's a basic structure. And that's what I got from it, and that was a good thing. Like I learned at least how to go into an open mic and what the basic idea was.
Right.
So once I had that, then you can kind of like go and start exploring on your own and understanding like what are the rules of this room, what are the rules of that room, and who is like doing big things, and who is, who are the grinders, who are all that stuff. So yeah,
it's very similar to auditioning as an actor too. It's like all about reading the room and not being a jerk, basically, and being a normal human.
This is what I've been told by some friends that are either they're stand-ups and they're acting, or people who are just actors, and we've shared stories, and they're like, yep, it's like an audition. Like, and sometimes you're in a room and you're doing stand-up, and it is an audition because there's someone there who may potentially want to book you for another show.
Right.
I guess the difference is sometimes you don't know it's an audition when it comes to stand-up, whereas like acting, you're assuming you're going in because that's the reason you're auditioning for something.
Yes.
Sometimes you could be auditioning for something you didn't even know it, and someone's like, oh, like it could be another comic who runs a show, and they're like, oh, I dig your stuff. Do you want to do my show? And you're like, oh yeah, cool. So in that sense, sometimes it's better not to know sometimes.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a great way to introduce you now.
Were we recording all that?
We were recording the entire
No,
time.
No,
you're
good. Yeah, okay.
Welcome to Now in Color, the podcast that brings those who have been erased from history back to the forefront. I'm your host, Sandie, and today I'm joined by Edward Pokropski. Did I pronounce that right?
You nailed it. Yes, you did.
Awesome. So, Edward was born in Seoul, South Korea, and then adopted at 19 months old. He was raised mostly in Philly, but he doesn't like cheesesteaks. And he's been boxing since he was 17, so some stereotypes do stick. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Throughout the week, he hosts an open mic under Laughing Buddha Comedy at Kilmat in East Village. He also performs stand-up in various clubs and bars throughout the country, but mostly New York, Philly, and New Jersey. And he's hosted numerous charity events as an MC. He also writes, produces, directs, and edits content for NBC Universal. He's done most of his work in kids television because kids are the most challenging of all audiences. Their mood can change instantly, and they can heckle better than anyone. That is so true.
It's so true.
I used to work with kids, too.
They
now
are
I'm scared
merciless.
of them.
Yes, yeah.
He lives in New York City, loves food, and shamelessly promotes Asian Americans everywhere, any chance that he can get. That was hard to read because I was switching your first person pronoun yeah, exactly. So welcome, Edward.
Thank you for having me. This is great being here. Yeah,
I'm so glad we finally connected after we met at Crushing the Myth.
Yeah, that was a really, and that speaker series popped up seemingly out of nowhere because there are a lot of like events and shows, and I run a stand-up and a variety show, and that's Asian American focused, and that one I had never heard of before. It was like kind of the first one here in New York, and it just popped up, and I saw a couple people going, and that guy got a great turnout, and you did a great talk on that, and that was awesome.
I didn't talk during that. I did a quick plug.
Did a quick plug. That's right.
Yeah. He just moved to New York, and then he like met so many influential people and made a huge event. And I'm like, wow, I did not make a lot of my time out of New York. I've just been doing nothing, I feel like.
There's always time, though. It can happen quickly here, though.
Yeah. So what did you think about the event, and like, should there be more speaker series like that, or
Well,
what were your main
so I talked to
takeaways?
him, JD, was it
Jerry.
Jerry? Sorry,
Jerry Damon Chang.
Yeah, Jerry Damon. I
Hi,
talked to him
Jerry.
after. He was great. He let me kind of plug my thing last minute, and I got up and plugged the show that I do. And he asked me, and I asked him if could I be a speaker on the next one. So so I'm gonna speak at the one on May 3rd.
What's your topic?
We talked about that. I have to reconnect because I had a couple things that I like pitched to him. I was like, well, I can talk about being in media and working as an Asian American in media. I was like, I can talk about the adoptee experience because it is kind of different in that way. It's very much like it's kind of like what I also hear from a lot of people who are mixed race, like half Asian and half something else. A lot of identity issues there, and a lot of things like not always feeling like your identity fits within the Asian American conversation all the time. So there was a lot of things and I think I still have to just touch base now that everything was solidified and figure out. So
Yeah.
long story short, I don't know yet, but it'll be something good.
I'm sure it will be.
Yeah.
Can you do you mind if you speak a little bit more about the adoptee experience?
Oh yeah, so oh man, how long did that have to be another podcast? No, being an adoptee, it's just you always have the first touch point. Of course, you said my name, Edward Pokropski. The first touch point is always, it feels like, is the name, and there's that initial thing of meeting new people if they've seen or heard my name first, and then I meet them, and it's always there's maybe a little joke made or just a quick like, huh, you what, and then so that's like just launching off like from there, and then it really does become. It's from that ranging all the way to talking and meeting some Asians who will, not maliciously so, but they'll say something like, "Oh, so you're not really Asian," and again, not I maybe when I was younger, I think I took that hard, but when I got older, I understood where that was really coming from, and from some people it was just not, they meant well,
Oh, you're so nice.
Well, no, I think
like immediately rolled my eyes.
No,
when
I
heard
know you
that.
did. Yeah,
I was just like,
this is this is the only problem with podcasts. You can't see facial expressions. But
I was immediately like,
yeah.
fuck those people.
Yeah, but I know, and again, I think where that comes from is just a place of misunderstanding, and then it, again, now that I'm older, it's a launching off point for a dialogue to start or a debate, whatever it is. So I think those are like the first two things that I can think of, like right off the bat, that being adoptee is like a stress point or can be a stress point. And then from there, it's it's a lot of struggles within, and I can only speak for myself, but struggles within yourself about family identity. And then, struggling with your own feelings about being Asian. I went through a good stretch of time where I didn't want to be Asian. And I know there are people who are, not adopted that feel similarly about their race no matter what. So there were times where I went through that whole thing where I felt so stretched because I was like, I don't have anything to go off when it comes to being Asian, but everybody looks at me and either tells me I am or says I'm not or whatever. I was stuck in a long time being defined by everyone else's picture or image of me. So I think that was the trickiest part. And then, of course, the questions come up of like, have you ever looked for your family or have you ever looked for your parents? And, I'm always open to talk about that. And the question thing people always say like, well, what if you found them? And I'm like, well, sure. What if a lot of things? And, there's been a lot of either movies or documentaries. One comes out, I feel like every like 2 or 4 years or something like that, where there was that one Twinsters that came out.
I was just thinking about that one.
Yeah, and that one was like super popular, and everyone loves those stories. Everyone loves the idea of like, you found a long lost sister, you found a long lost, and then those are exciting stories, and I get why. I think that the reality, obviously, is for the majority of adoptees is not that. It is not finding the long lost sister or sibling or mother or father. It's finding a piece of paper that breaks down what you maybe already knew, maybe a few things you didn't, and a thing that says, closed, meaning the adoption is closed, and that's the end of the story for that moment. I think there's always this hope, and people are always like wanting a little bit more out of the story, but sometimes that's just where it ends. That's where my story sort of like, I went back to Korea. I went back to the orphanage where I was for about 6 months when I was found, and that's kind of what it was. They gave me the file, a whole bunch of stuff in there, stuff I knew, stuff I didn't know, but ultimately what it said was, I was abandoned, and there's no other information other than that. So it was just nice to be there, and that I was okay with that. I didn't need to come back with a big, giant, this is your mom, or this is your dad, and they actually are the emperor of Korea, and I come back with, on a private jet or something. It wasn't that, but that was fine. That was okay. I just was happy to have, not to be cliche, but to have made the journey and made the trip. That was the important part.
Yeah. I'm so glad you have such a positive outlook on it, because I don't think a lot of people, for a lot of people that is very, I guess traumatic is the right word for it. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if your family, if they were supportive about that, or were they combative during that process?
Oh, no. So my mom, I was adopted, and then my adopted parents, they got divorced about like 5 years in. And I sort of lost touch with my dad. There was just a lot going on there, and we did not stay in touch. But my mom had always, and still to this day, is very supportive of all of that, of whatever I wanted to do in terms of seeking that out. She was more than supportive and willing to like help however she could, but also knowing that it's something that I needed to do on my own whenever I was ready. It's not like she ever pushed me to do so. So I know I have heard from other, adoptees that it can be a stress point, and certainly I understand why, because I think that's the other myth with when people find out that I'm adopted, is there's this quick thing to say, oh, your parents are so charitable. Oh, you're so lucky. Oh, and that's a common response I get. And my mom handles that very well too, because she's gotten it before too, where people were like, oh, it's so great that you took these unfortunate children in. And she's like, that's not what was happening. Like, Instagram didn't exist then. It wasn't like she was trying to like get the gram up, So they wanted to have kids. This was like a way to, and they couldn't on their own, but this was a way to do it. The way the adoption system worked, there was just incentives to adopt from countries like Korea, and it wasn't as lofty and big as as people think of, like people rescuing kids from a bad situation. It just isn't always that. So my mom has always been pretty, honest about it, and that's helpful. That's a big deal. So yeah, it's I've never felt like it was a bad thing for me to try to figure that out. If anything, for a long time, I didn't even think about it, or even myself, I was reluctant, because I was like, well, what am I going to find, or what is the big deal? And I was like, I'm an American, and wanted to just be like, I don't want to make a big deal out of it. But eventually, obviously, as anything does, that's in anyone's life, that's like a little bit of a sensitive topic. It catches up to you. You can put yourself as far away from you that you want, but you're gonna have to confront it eventually. And eventually, I did.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did. Yeah.
Yeah, because right now you do seem so confident in your identity and proud of who you are as an adoptee and as an Asian American.
Yeah, and I am, and I think it's because and I think it's also because I've talked to more people and heard, I've been a part of a couple different adoptee groups, and hearing other people's experiences on it, whether they were the same or whether they were very different from my own, was also helpful. So yeah, I think and again, like everything is, I think while I may feel and look confident as I sit here, which is easy because it's like, oh, someone's asking me about it on a podcast, cool. But for everyone, I think there are still days that you sit and you can have different thoughts about it and still not be 100% on anything. So yeah, while I do feel like I have a better handle of it, I think there's certain days that I'm like, that I still go, that I question it too, which I think is still fine. It's just something you do. Yeah.
It's the human experience.
The human experience,
Right.
of course. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's not often that I hear these stories because it is such a touchy and sensitive topic, especially for Asian Americans. So
Sure.
I'm so glad you shared that with me. Yeah. So what did you study when you went to school? So it sounds like your mom is super supportive of you and anything you do.
Well,
which is so lovely.
It is. I mean, so she was supportive, but also she's a bit of a pessimist, and a realist too. But I'll say, which I do appreciate now. But so when I went to school, I originally started out just studying general communications, and I did that because I just thought like, I wanted to do something versatile and safe. And I did have the thought that I did like writing. So I was like, well, maybe I can shift into journalism, or maybe I can shift into some form of it in a corporate setting or something. For a while there, I did almost go to culinary school.
That's amazing.
Because I went to school, or when I was in high school and then college, I like just worked in the kitchen. I liked cooking, I liked food, and there was a point where I was like considering it and almost kind of went through with it. And then I also was like thinking about being a psychologist. There was a lot of things that, and then my mom I was like, so what about cooking? She's like, well, you're never going to have weekends off, and it's going to be really hard, and most restaurants close within the first year. And I go, oh, all right. And then I was like, well, what about a psychologist? She's like, I've worked with a lot of psychologists, and man, they are some of the saddest people I've ever met. And you really don't have a life, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, fine. Funny enough, when I got to school and I finally like took a couple film and television classes just as electives, and I really liked them, and I just enjoyed the process, and I was like, oh, creative writing, right, I love this. I went to my mom, I was like, what do you think about film and television and stuff? And for some reason, that was the one that she was like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, you should do that, you're really good at writing, that sounds great. And I was like, cool, all right, well, I guess that's the one. And for all of the ones that like, which that one seems like to be the seemingly most risky and like ridiculous, I guess in my mind now, that was the one she was like, okay, yeah, sure, sounds good. And I was like,
that's so funny. Our lives are also eerily similar in that way, because in college I was like, I should go to culinary school because I was studying psychology, but I went to college as an English major, and then I was like, I'm going to switch to psychology to be practical.
Right.
And then I found out in culinary school you have to kill a rabbit, and I was like, I cannot.
Oh.
I can't. I will not do that. So I stuck with psychology.
That's good. Well, that's okay. That makes sense. Yeah. That's a big hurdle if you can't get over that.
Yeah. And just last week I called my mom sobbing because I was I freelance, but sometimes it takes up a lot of my time freelancing, doing freelance marketing and like writing for corporations and stuff. And I was so upset, just like crying. And I was just like, it's because I don't have time for creative writing, Mom. And my mom was just like, yeah, but creative writers don't make money, and that's just the reality of it.
And you're like, yeah, I get it. And I think, I mean, we're fortunate now, I will say, to have, there's never been a time where you can have a creative outlet aside from whatever your day job is, and actually have so many platforms that it can actually catch on and people like care, whether it's a podcast or YouTube, well, blogs aren't as popular anymore, obviously, but there's so many there's so much more media now and digital and such in the digital space that it's really actually a good time for, people who just want to have a little creative stuff after work, if that's all they want to at least start and see what it is. So
yeah.
So there's that at least, yeah.
Yeah, you were so positive.
I'm trying.
I should have known you last week when I was like sobbing for like 2 hours straight.
The fact that you said that I'm so positive proves that we don't know each other that well.
Oh,
yeah, because I can also be very jaded and cynical. But when push comes to shove, I have a positive outlook.
Yeah.
But there is a side of me that can get very cynical and jaded. So I don't want to put out to people and think that I'm actually too positive, because that is certainly not the case either. But yeah.
I think positivity is good.
Yeah.
I need more of that in my life.
No, it's helpful. It is helpful at times for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of being jaded and cynical, the reason we met and like sort of matched up was because you were telling me a joke that you had thought of in terms of history.
Right.
And I was just like, oh, you should definitely come on the podcast and tell this joke.
Yeah. So it was a joke that I had tried a couple times and had been working on, but it just never seemed to hit, and I sort of just shelved it, and I don't know if I just couldn't get the wording right or whatever, or what it was. But so I was on the subway, as one is in New York City. It's a way to start a lot of jokes. But so I was on the subway, and I'm overhearing a conversation that's happening, and it's between like early 20-somethings, like an Asian girl and a white girl on the subway. And the Asian girl, and I don't even know, I didn't hear what the lead-in was, but the Asian girl goes, yeah, if I could go back in time to, and this is how she talked, and she said, if I could go back in time to any time period in American history, I would definitely go back to the 1920s. She said, I would just go back and I would love it because the fashion was so cool, and it would just look so good on me, and my hair would look so good that way. So if I could go back in time, that's when I would go back to. And then sometimes in some crowds, people would laugh at just that because they know how absurd it is for an Asian American to want to go back to the 1920s in America, the absurdity of that. But for people who didn't know that, then the other part of that I forgot is she also said she liked the music of the time. She said she liked the music of the 1920s, like the Roaring Twenties, the Flapper, all that stuff. And then I say, well, yeah, I said, but if she went back to the 1920s, the only song she would be singing is, I've been working on the railroad. And that sometimes got a laugh, and a lot of times it got a groan, but it also sometimes got blank faces because they didn't quite get what I was referencing. So it really said to me that, much like her, a lot of people don't get just top-level stuff about our history. Not just Asian American history or history in general, American history in general. So clearly... And that's probably if they say ignorance is bliss, it's probably a happier way to go through life that you don't know these things. But yeah, the cynical side of me is I just had to thought, like, you can't go back, as if time travel is real. I was like, you can't go back to that time. It would be terrible. But so that was the joke that I was trying to tell, and we got into a conversation because it was me basically illustrating the point that, like, yeah, people just sometimes gloss over the shitty stuff that happens in history because it's much more fun and better just to focus on the things like the fashion, the music and stuff like that. And I totally get that. I totally understand. It's just sometimes there is comedy in the fact that, like, that you can just like weave in and out, and it's like, nope, sorry, it wasn't like that.
I know.
Yeah.
Do you find that Asian Americans mostly gloss over our own history in the country?
Well, I think sometimes. I mean, so the thing that I've talked to a lot of Asian Americans, and the one thing, well, I've also talked to people like that are, they're not like Asian Americans, they're like from Asia, and they talk about the idea that Asian American camaraderie is obviously very specific and an interesting experience to feel and witness within America itself. Within Asian American culture, we're all one thing. We're all Asian. Yes, we like, oh, you're Japanese. Oh, I want to hear about that. But we then we usually stop the conversation there. And now we are just the collective Asian American. And then we have all these experiences that come from wherever we may have come from. But for some people, they're confused because they're like, it's interesting that there's all this camaraderie because of all the terrible things that Asians have done to each other, history. And there's a lot of resentment there, especially with older generations. and parents of these kids that are just like, yeah, why you guys being so friendly? That's not how it was. So yeah, I think there's some. I mean, again, it's better that we are just like, we put that stuff. We don't even think about that because we're living in the now in one sense. But it's good to, when I sort of understood that, I was like, oh yeah, that did happen.
Yeah.
And it's not that you should hold on to the past, obviously, and it's not that you should hold resentment, obviously, or think of people in that way, like, oh, you can't be cool with people anymore because that happened. Obviously not. That's terrible. That's how a lot of problems start. It's just good to know, and it's not to be so just like, yeah, we're all the same, and it's like, no, we're not. we're very different within our own community, in many different ways, and we come from many different ideologies and backgrounds and parents and all that stuff. So if there was one thing that I think Asian Americans we forget about history wise, it's just that it wasn't always Asian American.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That reminds me of something my dad said. I don't even remember what we were talking about, but he was just like, the Japanese were just as bad as the Nazis, basically. And he was just like, they also ran experiments on Chinese people. And I was like, yeah, I know, but we should just forget about it. As if and then even now I'm still like, the Nazis were awful.
Right.
And that is something I do forget about. Because I'm coming from such like a European history lens of it.
Well, and it's fascinating to think about how people I've talked I have a couple of German friends. They're like from Germany, and they were the idea is that in Germany, and I haven't gone, so I can't speak to it firsthand, but a lot of people tell me it's like in Germany there's a lot of active things done to put modern Germany as far away from the Nazis in that time, and a lot of apologetic things, and just a lot of things put into place to say, we're sorry, that's not us now. There was a part of it that was then, but there was an acknowledgement, an apologetic, vibe to it, and a lot of things to say we're taking responsibility in a weird way. And they technically don't even have to, but they do. So there's that. The thing with with Japanese, I think, is that, and this might sound weird, but there's not a word, there's not a Nazi you can say. Mm-hmm. There's not exactly the same evil word that is associated with the Japanese, and there's been so much divisiveness and a lot of racism towards Japanese people coming from white America that it almost trumped over all the other stuff that was going on at the time and their alliance, that you're just like, well, whatever, they did that, but it's cool because those white Americans, they're the shitty ones. And you're like, well, everyone was kind of being a little shitty, to put it mildly. But I think that's also why. I think because Nazi was so much and I hate to say this, but I guess the Japanese were like the Asian best friend of the of the Nazis in that movie.
That's one way to put it.
Well, we were like the supporting character, I guess is
of
a way.
The Axis powers.
Even back then, oh man, to edit that out. I can't believe I said it. But even back then, that we have that
kind of
problem where we're always cast as the best friend. Well, that's kind of what was happening in World War II. Is we were kind of and then we were obviously, there was the Japanese were doing their own terrible stuff, but it was the Nazis were so bad that most people just think about the Nazis at the time as being the true bad guys.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue for, I think, of the history topic you brought in, because you were talking about spam today.
Yeah.
And spam is born out of war in some ways.
Yes. So the thing that I sort of brought up, so again, very interested in food, love food and love, food shows and food media. And and one thing in that happens a lot now in Asian media and Asian culture is we as a collective, and I would say I've been guilty of it, and sometimes I do think it goes too far, is we as a collective are very possessive of our food culture. We are very much on watch of who's making it, who's claiming ownership, who's saying the word authentic, who's, And
it's like every Next Shark article.
exactly.
I honestly hate that publication. Sorry.
No, I
It's
agree.
so
That
annoying.
some of the articles, I'm like, some of the articles and headlines for NetShark is like, racist woman on subway yells at Asian person. You're like, yeah, you mean Tuesday? Like that happens all the time. Like, what do you mean? This isn't news.
Yeah.
Like if it was a state senator who was doing something or saying something or passing some sort of legislation, okay, I get that. That's news. One person's like crazy like reaction or bad behavior is not a whole article. That's just not that's not something that feels weird and not right. But
and they also, and this is just coming from I just fucking hate this article. They always post articles specifically about white men torturing Asian women.
Right.
Like all the time. Just to like, and I know beneath that it is to basically say like, all white men are torturing their Asian girlfriends. And there's like a whole other thing about that. I'm just like, dude, you don't need to post pictures of it. It's so triggering. It's so crazy too.
And it's also very telling of their editorial process, if there is one at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's so, I agree that it gets a bit much, to say the least. And I also do not like that publication.
Yes. Good to know.
Good to know. Yeah.
All my Asian American friends keep sharing it, and I'm like, stop.
Well, it's just
Stop sharing it.
they're at a certain point. It's just like, is this? I guess this is all they usually post. Yeah. More that could be its own podcast too.
Exactly. Just reading Next Shark's articles.
Podcast. So anyway, wait, what was I saying about the the food. The food thing? Yes. So we're very protective of our food, which I appreciate and understand, because food is such an cultural part of cultural identity, and it sustains a culture, and it does kind of tell you the history of a culture, of how the geography was in a certain place at a certain time, or who was ruling, who was the lower class. It just tells you so much. So I can understand why we hold it so dear and why we are so holding it so close. The one thing I always do find fascinating is spam, because spam is such a it feels like a very Asian-centric food that a lot of these publications or Asian people or restaurants or T-shirts or things, it's like a pop culture piece of our of food, like the same way boba is, or sushi. It's become one of those things, and we've sort of claimed it as our own. If to say in one way, we've appropriated spam, which is funny that we did. So, but obviously, and I do honestly think most people know its origins, but I'm not sure.
I don't think most people do,
So
actually.
it's one of the most American foods there ever could be. It honestly, it started, I did have to look some of it up. I knew some things, but I did have to look it up. So it started in 1937 from the Hormel Company. Again, Hormel, one of the, most as American as apple pie.
I actually don't know.
Okay, so Hormel makes that, like, the other thing they're known for is they make chili. They make canned food. They make canned, dried food. So so they started making spam at a time where a lot of companies were trying to make non-perishables and food that could get shipped to American GIs in the war. And that everyone was kind of having like a canned meat race to try to get like the canned meat that could last a long time, offer protein, do all these things. Hormel won out with spam. And so it got shipped to a bunch of soldiers, and it was not popular at all. If anything, they hated it. Like after a while, it just was something that they got sick of, and it was because it's like in its raw form out of the can does not look very pleasing.
Yeah. So this is 1938, you said?
Oh, well, 1937 was created,
1937.
and then and then it was, and
So
then
it's
through
for
World War II.
World War II,
Through
yeah.
World War II is when it like was being consumed and shipped, and a main staple of the army rations at the time. So from there, it, and then of course it found its way into all these different Asian cultures. It found its way again with the Korean War. It found its way into Korean cuisine with Budae Jjigae. And again, for anyone who speaks Korean, I'm sorry if I butchered. I've had it plenty of times, and my Korean's terrible. So I'm sure there's some Korean person who's like, "Oh my God, he really is adopted." So that's army stew. It's like ramen noodles. It's hot dogs. It's spam, kimchi, all this stuff in a soup. And basically,
do you know
stew.
who invented this in Korea? Who was
Well-
just like, I'm going to take some spam hot dogs and all these American foods and put it in a pot.
As always, when you try to find the origin of any dish, there's so many people that claim it. I've seen plenty of like articles, and like I saw this one YouTube clip where they went to this like old Korean grandmother who runs this, and she claimed to do it. But all the stories sound like so ridiculous. Like I'm sure it just sort of happened at the same time. And basically, what they said was for the army bases that were based in Korea, they had a surplus of food and of the spam, so it was just sort of being given away. And then the Koreans, and as Asians, we are very resourceful, and we make food taste really good. They just were like, okay, you're giving us this, we'll put it in with some other stuff that we already make and kind of like work with it, and they made it delicious. The other thing that this is one thing that I didn't know, and again, another thing about it is that I think one thing people know is that it's very popular in Hawaii. It's
Yes.
it's so ingrained in Hawaiian street food and just food in general. But again, part of the reason it was so popular in Hawaii was when the Japanese internment camps were happening. In Hawaii, they couldn't do that. They couldn't lock up all the Asian people like they were in like the mainland America. They couldn't do it in Hawaii because it would have crippled the whole population and economy of Hawaii. So what they did instead was they put sanctions on Asian and Japanese fishermen, so they weren't allowed to fish. So instead of locking them up, they said, you're not allowed to fish, you're not allowed to earn that source of food or income. So out of that, spam became their main source of protein and meat because they didn't have fish anymore.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was like, I read that and I was like, God damn it, it's worse. No, I was kidding. So
So bad.
again, the spam becoming popular and becoming a staple of Hawaiian cuisine came out of something really awful. And again, I'm not saying this to be like to ruin it for anyone, and like we're not going to stop eating it.
Yeah.
It's just like the same way people say you should know where like your food comes from a farm, or the cow or the chicken or whatever. I think things like this, it's helpful to understand and know too. And it should be, in one regard, it should be celebrated in a way that says, we as a community are resourceful, and we can take a tough situation and make it better. And that's the better story, obviously. The jaded side of me would say, God, why do so many good things have to come out of like war or bad things? Why is that the thing? But it's so funny because most of the videos and articles that I was reading or watching to prepare for this, they talk about World War II the same way you talk about like Woodstock, or they're just like, it was sent out to the soldiers in World War II, and then it just caught on. Like the tone that they mention World War II in all these videos is just so matter of fact, and so like with almost a hint of like, wasn't that crazy time in our history? And it's like, and there's like fun music playing, and then like a colorful transition. And it is, when I watch stuff like that, I'm always like, okay, well, I guess at least you're being honest, but also that was terrible. So it's fascinating to me, and I guess it's a fascinating thing to understand where our food comes from and what we truly feel like we claim as our own, but knowing its origins as well, and to know that there was a lot of hard work and a lot of pain so that we now could just basically, unfortunately, pay $5 for like a spam musubi, which is a ripoff, obviously. But like for us to have like, so that Time Out New York or Eater can be like, the hot new place in Brooklyn is serving up a spam fries. Isn't that crazy? And then, someone's taking an Instagram picture with it and be like, look at this, spam fries. So to say, like, I think understanding the full circle of what that really is, and to just, see where it came from and where we are at now, is to me fascinating and somewhat important too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what do you think about, since you were talking about like, oh, Brooklyn, what do you think of like a lot of I guess white chefs, coming up with ramen restaurants and Taiwanese restaurants. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it depends on how they approach it. Obviously, I think it depends on what because again, food is one of those things where you go to culinary, you go to culinary school, or you, like anything with music or any type of art, you learn a lot of different backgrounds, disciplines, techniques, and of course a chef is going to learn about Asian food, as they should. Now, if that's what they gravitate towards and they decide, hey, I really love what this culture is doing with their food, I want to get in on it, I can understand. And from a chef, artist, whatever perspective you want to say, that makes a lot of sense. And if anything, it's good to further a food culture in as much as you can. And I think what gets problematic for people, and I can understand, is when certain people claim it to be authentic or better than another person who's making it, or just saying they are the authority on it. And I think that's usually when it gets very tricky. But if there's a white chef that is, has come to love this cuisine and is taking the care and really looking at the ingredients and the culture and understanding the full circle nature of it, and wants to make a career, wants to make a restaurant off of that, that's okay. That's good. But I think it's just when we're so quick to, when we see these articles and see this person, they're being like, the new, and you see the face, it's quick. It's so quick to be like, fucking, bleh. And even me and my, girlfriend will joke, be like, well, maybe we'll go to the other one. Or we'll joke, like, there's a Korean barbecue place in K-Town that we really loved and we would go to a lot, called Samwon Garden. And there came a point where it was like, we were joking, there was now sort of like more white people in there than Korean, and we were like, maybe let's try a different one. All that's sort of like half joking, half real, but it becomes one of those things where you don't want to ever feel like people are just tourists to something without fully them appreciating it.
Right.
And again, that's also, I understand how judgmental and pretentious that sounds when I say that, but I also just, it is just one of those things. Now, on the flip side, I know that if I saw an article that said, or a video that like, this Korean chef is making the hottest pizza in Brooklyn, you got to check it out, it's like authentic, blah, blah, blah. I probably first like knee-jerk reaction, like, cool, awesome, I gotta go there and talk to that guy. And then there'd be a point where I'd stop and say, okay, well, wait, what's happening? How is he approaching it? And there's, for any art form, for anything, there are some people that are going to take it very seriously and they're going to take it with respect. And there's going to be some people who just want to make a buck. And you can smell and sniff those people out right away. And I think at the end of the day, it's the people who want to just make a buck that we're trying to shout out and say, no, if someone's going to make a buck on it, it should be an Asian person, is, I think. If you're just coming out there and you really respect this and you love it and you love the culture and you love the people, and most of the time those guys do have an Asian wife or girlfriend And if that's the case, I get it. I understand. There's more to it than just. I think I can sort of like, you can get a sense of it when someone's just being a shitty person and when someone's truly appreciating a culture. So it's not a hard and fast rule to say, oh, white people should never make Asian food. That's ridiculous. I know I've probably eaten, I mean, I'm sure I've eaten plenty of Asian food made by white people. But yeah, it's one of those things that I think we just need to not be so knee-jerky with everything is what I'm saying.
Right. It's so interesting because I think my perspectives have changed a lot since starting this podcast, because my knee-jerk reaction, like yours, would be like, oh, it's a white chef, I'm never eating there, you know? And then, like, for example, there's Winsun in Williamsburg, which is Taiwanese, and it is a white chef, and I'm like, it's pretty good. I mean, it's not my favorite, but it's pretty good. And I appreciate that it's like a Taiwanese American owner, I guess. So I'm just, and there's Ivan Ramen, and I'm just like, it's from all the food documentaries I watch, it sounds like he just really loves Japan and loves ramen, and I'm like, good for him.
Yeah, good for him. I know, and I think that's, I think there's space for everyone, and you assume obviously at some point along his travels, I'm sure he probably had some guidance from Asian chefs or Asian people, and I think it's one of those things where, the good food will always rise and will win out, and I don't think we should be so always worried. And I know within New York it's a very competitive landscape, and I think our worry always is that a white-owned Asian restaurant is going to get more press or more validity than an Asian American run one. I think that's our worry sometimes, is that we're like, well, this is only getting press or news because there's a bit of a difference in, and they know it'll get some likes and some dislikes because of that. So it's more of it's a better article to run. So I think there's that worry too, is that we want to make sure that everyone's getting fair coverage for good food or for good design or whatever it is. We don't want to think that only the people who are, saying, look at this guy and he's making some food that doesn't look like him. It's just like, oh, yeah, I guess. People do that all the time, but sure. So yeah, I think that's the other thing too. I think we're very, we're just, we're just hoping that's not what's happening either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess if it's all going to come full circle, there has to be a white chef out there who's going to make some Spam Korean fusion of something, right?
Sure. I think it's funny because, again, I will say the full circle is that Spam started out as something that the American GIs didn't like, and it seemed like something that got passed off. Then Asians got to it, and they started making it really well and making it really tasty. Now white American chefs are saying, yeah, we want to do it too. So I guess that's the full circle of it. I guess that's to say the same way, coal can be turned into a diamond. Maybe that's what's happened with Spam, is that it started out as one thing, and through some time and an evolution, it's come out on the other end as a diamond.
I don't think I've ever had like American Spam. Does that make sense? Like
American style Spam.
Spam. I've only had it in Korean or Japanese cuisine.
I, funny enough, I had it when so my dad for a little while lived in Virginia, and I would visit him and his when he remarried. I would spend some certain holidays with them, and the first time I ever had Spam was actually with them. Because they claimed it was a Southern thing. They would fry it in a pan, treat it like almost fried bologna or again, and then just put it on a sandwich. So, appropriately enough, because I am adopted, the first time that I had Spam, it was as a kid, from my white dad in the South, and having it presented to me as a Southern thing that they grew up with in a Southern tradition. So again, everyone, if they like it, they claim it. If they don't like it, they throw it off to someone else. And then if they make it really well, then they claim it again. So I think that's what it's like. And again, I think Spam is one of those fascinating things because it has such it's very polarizing. You either think it's gross and you hate it, and it's like, you think it's like just bad for you, which it is.
Right?
It is, yeah. Well, one thing I did find out is Spam is just 6 ingredients.
Oh, what is it?
It's pork, and mainly pork shoulder. So not like where hot dogs, they say it's like the snout and all the leftovers. It's pork. It's mostly the pork shoulder. So not a bad cut. Mm-hmm. So it's pork, water, sugar, salt, sodium nitrate, potato starch. I think that's 6, right? Did I say 6 items?
I don't know. I didn't count. I'm sorry.
So yeah. So it's basically the worst thing in the mix of that is sodium nitrate, which is basically just more salt and preservatives. But of all the things that we eat, I mean, that's not so bad. There's plenty of foods with more, crazy ingredients in them. But it is one of the things that kept coming up is that it's only 6 ingredients, and it's just the combination of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good. Maybe you guys can blend some of your own.
Yeah, there's
Put it in a can.
There's so many different. Yeah, someone does like a Spam drink, like a cocktail somewhere. Yeah, it's a little bit too much. All of these things are someone does the whole $100 Spam musubi, which is just a Spam musubi wrapped in gold leaf, which I hate. Those are the people who are obviously just trying to make a buck and being assholes. So
yes.
yeah. So it's just, I guess the other thing when I was researching Spam, which I knew I would find, is it goes to the point of how humble foods are co-opted and then modified to charge people a lot of money for them, and that always makes me feel weird because it's like these things were made out of a humble beginning. They were made to get people through hard times and get people to a certain point, and they were made from humble families, and then now it's being taken and you're charged. Oh, the one place, what's it called? Ichiran ramen.
Oh, is that the solo one?
Yeah, that's the solo one. Their base ramen is $18.
That's why I haven't been there. I can't believe that. No.
And and I get it. I know some people are like, well, you're paying for the experience. You're paying for blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no. And I understand if like people are adding like smoked duck and stuff like that. Like I get that. But, and I'm sure there's some Asian chefs who would be like, I'm just making money off of these stupid people, and I'm like, oh, I guess if that's the thing, if that's happening, maybe I can go on board. But it's just, it's one of those things where I keep saying, I swear to God, if pho ever becomes that, that might be it. I might just have to go I might just have to move.
I think pho is making a comeback in New York because it was ramen for a little while, and I feel like in the last 2 years it was Taiwanese food randomly. Like you were saying, humble foods like luro fen. Right. It's so expensive, and that's like what my dad would say. Poor people would eat that, and I'm just like, yeah, and it's comfort food.
It's exactly.
But now it's like a bowl of it is $16.
Yeah, and it's just like you put a fancy thing on top, you present it, you add a cocktail, and now all of a sudden, what was humble beginnings is now, you're just raking it. And again, I know this is the restaurant, the nature of restaurants. You need to make stuff that's like buzzworthy, and you need to stay afloat. So I'm just complaining from a consumer standpoint and from a cultural. I know if I was working in a restaurant and I was a restaurateur, I'd be like, who's this fucking idiot talking about? I mean, I got to pay the bills. There's a rent due every month. So I do want to say that I do understand that as well. It's just one of those things that, you see too many articles and you see too many Instagrams, and you start to get a little bit like fatigued about the $18 ramens and the whatever. So, so I just want to tell everyone to don't eat pho. It sucks. It's
Really? I think pho in California is good.
no. I'm trying to say that to them so it doesn't become too popular. So that's why I'm trying to put the word out to tank it so that it can stay at the price point that it's at that I'm comfortable with. No. I know nothing will ever stop Asian food because it's also. And I can understand why people want to appropriate it. It's because it's so.
It's yummy.
It's so good, and it's one of those things that like, it comes from a place of fresh ingredients and all this stuff. So and ingenuity and all those things. So, I get it. I understand why people want to take it as their own, and that that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying earlier about like the ownership of it. I think why the Asian American community gets so freaked out by it is because it's like a sense of their home is being taken away, and like the only source of, at least for me, like Asian food is such a huge source of comfort. Like if I am on some weird diet like that where I only eat salads or something, I get really sad, not just because I'm eating the salads
because you can't eat
but I
rice
can't eat like rice and noodles. So that's why I've just stopped dieting. I'm just like, no.
I get that. No, I get that totally. And I think it's funny when it comes to the other thing that I think is the huge paradox of food and appropriation of that is that I also hear from a lot of Asians the whole story of like if they did grow up in a traditional Asian household and they had to take the lunch to school and people would make fun of their lunch. It is also interesting to say there was a time where people were like, gross, ew, about the majority of Asian food. Mm-hmm. And then there was this push to be like, hey, no, it's good. Don't hate our food. And then it just swung in the complete opposite direction where people were like, oh, yeah, it is. All right, now it's ours. And you're just, whoa. We just want you to not say it was gross and say it smelled funny. We didn't say now it's yours. That's not what we were saying. And they were like, oh, well, too late. It's good. And it's like, God damn it. It's like, and I think that's the same has happened with martial arts and martial arts movies, is that there was a time where we were like, after Jackie Chan and Jet Li, Asian Americans and media, we were like, hey guys, we are more than just the karate experts and like martial arts movies. Like you need to put us in more things. And it's not like all of us know karate. And then all of a sudden people were like, okay, that's fine. We'll just put white people in those karate movies. And we're like, whoa. No, we weren't saying that. We were saying give us more roles that are other things, but like also don't take all the martial arts roles and that you guys are now the karate and kung fu and whatever experts. And they're like, nah, we like it. It's really cool. So now it's ours. And you're like, God damn it, I guess we just shouldn't say anything because then they're just going to be like, yeah, you're right. We'll take it and it's ours now. So I think much like, there's a lot of Asian culture things that start out as being very much either specific to us and it becomes our burden. And then when we try to like just like relieve ourselves of it, it quickly gets like co-opted and taken in another way. And we're left going like, well, shit, I guess we gotta figure out the other thing, or maybe we gotta get that back. I don't know, So I think that's me, and this is just again me just talking for myself and saying the royal we, but again, this is just me just bullshitting around about the idea of that and how I felt sometimes seeing these things happen and being like, wow, that kind of backfired,
Yeah. Do you find yourself craving more Asian foods or more because you grew up in a more American?
Right. I think
non-Asian household.
Well, I think it depends on I joked. I said I don't particularly. I mean, I've eaten my fair of cheesesteaks, but like it's not the thing that when people are like, "Oh, I want to get a cheesesteak, where to go?" And I'm always like, "Yeah, there's cheesesteaks are good, but there's a lot of other good food in Philly that Philly's known for, sandwiches and diners, and there's a whole great food scene there that I try to tell people about that's like unique to Philly." Mm-hmm. And so there's stuff like that I try to say, but yeah, you can get the cheesesteak, sure, but now also try this other stuff. Yeah, I would say throughout the week I eat a lot of Asian food, but it's just because it's good and we're here in New York and there's a lot of it. So yeah, growing up, the first thing that I ever cooked was spaghetti and meatballs. That's the first thing I ever learned how to cook, and I still like cooking it today. I just recently my girlfriend got me one of the pasta roller things so we can make fresh pasta.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's not one of those things that yeah, like obviously I don't only eat Asian food. I love all types of food from all types of cultures and around the world, but yeah, if you were like if I had to only eat one type of food for the rest of my life, it would be some form of Asian food,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. It's weird, as the older I get, the more I'm just like, I just want to eat Chinese food. That's all I want to eat.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think there was a long stretch of time where like I got sick of like corner store or like dirty Chinese food, like
Oh,
where
yeah, no, that's awful.
but
Yeah.
but I know, but sometimes there are some times where I sort of like get a craving for it.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, there is. And there's certain times, and my girlfriend, who is originally from Hong Kong, mainly grew up in Canada, but every time I sort of suggest it, she's like, no. And I was like, okay, fine. So there's times where like she might work late and then like what I'll do, my usual thing is she's working late or not home and I'm home, is usually I'll watch a shitty action movie that she wouldn't want to watch, and I order shitty Chinese food, and that's usually like my evening. So there's a sweet spot. There's a soft spot for shitty Chinese food in that. Not to say it's shitty. I just mean, not
No, I totally know what you mean.
American Chinese food that's like, greasy and General Tso's and stuff like that.
Yeah. Although, did you watch the General Tso documentary?
I did watch that documentary. Yeah. And again, it was why I like that and why I really thought about when when you talked about a topic to talk about is I really enjoyed that documentary specifically for the fact that it broke down where that came from and why it became what it was. And that was fascinating to me because I hadn't known that. I hadn't realized that about this iconic Chinese American dish and what it really illustrates. And yeah, it's easy to just write off certain things as being like just whatever, just a shitty version of a dish or something, but you really do see, you can understand where people were coming from to try to connect, again, survive, make some money, and just to look at their surroundings and say, what do we got to do to get by?
Right.
And
exactly.
and to me, always a lot of the best things come out of necessity and ingenuity. And I think again, I think it's again, to say a documentary about General Tso's chicken can be like beautiful, but I thought it was great. And while like it's easy like thinking about another food documentary, Hero Dreams of Sushi.
Oh my god, love.
It's beautiful, but in one regard, it's very much one note, and it's almost like watching a I don't want to say a porn, but it's a lot of the same ideas and shots. Like you understand who that guy is, and again, it's beautifully shot and it's like wonderful. But honestly, that thing could maybe have been like half an hour, and you probably would have gotten the same story, honestly. But the General Tso's chicken thing is, again, it's one of those things where there's a lot of layers to peel back, and get like it was more of there's a collective thing that's happening.
Right.
So that's why I find, again, it's not like I'm being a film critic here to compare the two, but I'm just saying that I found the General Tso's one just slightly more fascinating for that very reason, is that I was learning about something bigger in that way.
Right.
Yeah.
I like how you put that it was mostly about survival, which a lot of these Chinese Americans or any Americanized foods, I feel like, is about. Like, for example, a guest recently talked about Panda Express.
Sure.
Which I didn't even know that it was owned by a Chinese couple.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, I've never, like, hated Panda Express, but now I'm like, oh, orange chicken's fine, whatever.
Exactly. And I think that's what we forget sometimes is, behind these things, I think, again, we want to assume that there's some sort of, like, insidious thing going on. And anything that catches popularity and makes a lot of money, that it's going to get bigger. That's just what's going to happen. But where it starts is often like a good place, and I think it's yeah, it's easy to make fun of Panda Express, but you know, again, there's still, I mean, technically, Panda Express is more Asian than Spam, but Spam seems to get like a pass, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I can see why, just because it just seems hipper, it seems cooler, and the people who are, you know, usually eating Panda Express, it's like, you know, people in a mall or at the airport or something, and you know, but yeah, again, it's just you know, it's just interesting to know and to think about. But yeah, and food, that's the other thing about food is, at the end of the day, maybe none of this really matters, because like it does come down to your tastes.
Right.
And what do you really, you know, what do you really want to eat? Some people don't even give a shit about food. They're just like my brother, for instance, he usually, well, I don't want to say that he doesn't care about food, but he is much more of a eat to live. He's more of an eat to live more than a live to eat type of guy.
Yeah, I don't get along with people like that.
Well, me and my brother get along okay. No, just kidding. No. But he enjoys good food too. Like when we go out and he tells me, you know, hey, you know, he lives in Dallas now, and you know, I didn't realize there was such a larger Asian population in Dallas, and there's some good Asian restaurants out there, and when I went and visited him, he told me about a bunch, and yeah, so he gets it too. It's just like he also sometimes, like, he's done the whole meal prep thing where he's only eaten the same like thing 5 days a week because he was like super into fitness. And I was, yeah, when he told me that, I was like, oh man, you're yeah, they're very disciplined, and I, you know, but I couldn't do it.
I can't do it.
I can barely do it 2 days in a row, and I'm just like, yeah.
The last time I did like a diet, which is not, I'm just like, I just don't do it. I get so sad during it, was I did a sugar detox.
Oh,
and it
God.
was like, basically you can't eat any carbs or just delicious things.
Right.
And like you can't have anything that has sugar in it. So even fruits. And I was just like, why? I did it for 10 days, and I was just like, no, I can't do this. I need to just only eat Asian food.
10 days is impressive, I will say. I tried to go vegetarian for like a 2-week period, and it was rough. Funny enough, after I saw the movie Okja, did you see that movie?
I can't, because I used to be a vegetarian.
Oh, okay,
I know if I watch that, I will turn back into a vegetarian.
Well, let me give you this. Like I watched like Food Inc. I've watched documentaries that are very much like, don't eat meat, here's why, and it shows all the atrocities and all that stuff. And I've watched those, and afterwards I'm like, yeah, I get it. And then I eat meat. Like, it's not even, I'm like, oh wow, yeah. And I was like, do you want to get some wings or something? It's like I've been basically unaffected.
Right.
I watched Okja, and maybe it was because they put it in a character perspective, and it was like a nice narrative. Like I needed a character arc to happen, maybe, that I did for like that next like 2-week period. I was like, and I love meat and I eat it every day, but there was a point that for that week I was like, all right, I really need to cut back. It is too much. Like I need to calm down. And it was only that movie, and again, I guess because there was that weird emotional connection with a fictional CGI animal that it wasn't real animals that made me feel anything. It was a fictional CGI animal that was like, yeah, I guess I am kind of terrible. So it's funny how like, yeah, that happens sometimes.
Yeah, I can't watch it because I know I
don't
will...
watch it. If it affected me, and I am I love eating meat, it would just wreck you. You wouldn't be able to continue.
Can't even watch those normal documentaries where they do show the slaughterhouse, because as soon as I see any animal harm, I'm just like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person.
No, I get it. Yeah.
This one time, my boyfriend and I, we went upstate to just like get away, and like we stayed on a farm. And there were like cows. It was like a utopian place, and there were like cows, and like we took our cat with us. It was a whole thing.
That's nice, yeah.
And I was just like, oh my gosh, these animals that I'm petting, like these goats and these pigs, they get eaten. Like, because the farmer actually gave us some of the meat that he sells. Oh. And it tasted so much better than meat you buy in the grocery store. And then, but then when I was eating it, I was like, oh my God, I'm eating these cows that I've been like hanging out with. Yeah, but it's so sad.
I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, I've thought about before when it comes to like Kobe cows, like if you told me that I had the option, like if you were like, listen, you're gonna have a life, you're not gonna live super long, but the life that you have is gonna be fantastic, I would be like, keep talking, tell me more. And they'd be like, well, you're gonna get, fed beer all the time, you're gonna have a lot of space, and you're gonna get massages every day, and then when you do die, the meat that is coming from you is going to be sold at the highest price and held at like this crazy standard, and there's going to be videos done on you, and it's just going to be all over the place. Again, I'd be like, well, all right, that's not so bad. I mean, again, I'm not condoning, but I feel like if they're in certain cases when it comes to animal, the way that they're treated and kept, that's an example of a place where I do not feel sorry for Kobe cows, because I feel sorry for more people, or
the slaughterhouses.
The slaughterhouses,
yeah.
I get, that's but when it comes to there's, I think not all animals are treated equally, obviously, and I think for some, and again, the whole thing, it always comes up is the idea of cultural traditions and how their viewpoints on animal treatment versus like a westernized viewpoint on it too. So there's that thing to like the whole shark fin soup thing where shark fin soup in China is very much a cultural identity food. It comes from a place of a different culture standard for food and animals and stuff like that, but often it's always demonized from mostly a Western viewpoint, which again, I get, and I'm not, some would argue just like right is right and wrong is wrong, and I'm fine. But there's something else bigger there, because it does come from the idea of eating shark fin soup is threaded so much in a culture. And the judgment that gets put on it is it's easy just to be like, well, we're thinking about the animals. And it's like, sure, I guess, but like, it's a weird thing to pick here, because of all the other atrocities that are done to animals. This one's right in the same wheelhouse, So that's why I'm always like, I've seen how shark fin soup happens, and I get it. It's like, it is inhumane, and it's not, it's not something that I think most people could justify the treatment of how shark fin soup is taken. But again, I say it's no worse than what Americans do to our animals as well. So it's just a weird thing to hop onto, to say like, you can't eat shark fin soup, but you can eat a cheeseburger. It's like, well, I don't know if it's that. So like Gordon Ramsay, he had a whole thing where he like was on this tear to like tear it down and be like, you can't eat shark fin soup, and he was like going to restaurants in China and being like, do you swear that you're not serving it? Because if you are, it's illegal, and also don't serve it. And which it technically was illegal, but he was very much like, I know you serve it like as like a off menu item. So like he was like, and then he got a couple, and it's part of his brand. I get it. He got a couple of restaurants to like say like, okay, we're not going to serve it anymore. Like high end restaurants were like, we're not going to serve it anymore. But on the flip side, he is a big defender of foie gras.
Yeah, foie gras.
Yeah.
I can't say that for some reason.
No,
it's
hard.
awful.
Now that I've seen a video where someone is saying like, here's a way that we've figured out how to make it a little bit more humanely. And he's on there going like, woof, I don't know if it's the same though. And he's also like, well, we can't judge. It's a French delicacy, and it comes from the French, it comes from their cultural background, and this is a cultural food, and it's not for us to judge how it's made and like this, because he loves it, because he uses it, because it's something that he has always used, and it's easy for him to put it separate of him, because he's like, well, I can't stop using foie gras. I love it and I use it. So to me, it's funny that it's easy for him to make the distinction when it comes to foie gras, which honestly, if you put it side by side, is much worse than shark fin soup. But shark fin soup, he doesn't like it. He didn't grow up with it. He doesn't cook with it. And he tried it, but he's like, it just tastes like broth. And it's like, oh, okay. So if you did like it, then you'd find a way to be like, well, it's a Chinese cultural thing and it's blah, blah, blah. So I think that is one case. I know we were talking before about not getting on but I do think that's one case where there's some, hypocrisy is a strong word. It's a case where someone clearly, their blinders, they're choosing to look at one thing and find the understanding, and then looking at it on another light and being like, nah, it's not cool. It's these people are terrible. And you're like, hey, dude, like, I thought we were cool, So, yeah, I think, again, just going back to the idea of tying it always back to the idea of food and history and culture, it's, as history is, it depends on who's writing it. It depends on who's talking about it. It depends on who's creating the narrative of the history. So food is the same, and what gets demonized versus what gets held up as the luxury item is very much threaded in one, culture and who's controlling the narrative at that point.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And what is something you want listeners to take away from this? Is that the one thing you want listeners to take away from this entire topic, or is there anything else that shifted your perspective as you were doing research? Or
I guess the only thing I would say for listeners to take away is just be mindful of what you eat. That's it. It's not so, you don't have to sit down there and like feel guilty about what you're eating. You don't have to like not eat something because you think, I also think it's weird when people get too preachy about that. I'm not trying to do that either. Again, because who the hell am I? And what do I know? It's not like I'm some sort of like certified food expert. Even if I was, like, what is that? Where do you get that? But so,
I want that job.
Yeah, I know that'd be a cool job, right?
Yeah.
So I would just say, be aware of what you're eating. If you like it, and that's cool. Just know that behind any food there's usually a story, and I think when things are trying to be too trendy or too whatever, I mean, that's a big like sniff test thing for like being like, what am I really being fed? Am I being fed, a story, or am I being fed good food? But again, this is all moot if you're the type of person who just does not give a shit and you're just like, I just want to get 3 square meals and go to bed. And if that's the case, cool, whatever, eat whatever you want.
I can't.
So yeah,
I don't
I know.
understand people like that.
I don't get it either. I know some people are like very picky eaters too, and they yeah, but I would say just, for us, for Asian, for Asian Americans, like, let's not be so quick to jump on people for cooking food. Like, let's still be like, you still want to be diligent and like, again, understand, but let's also not get too caught up with every single NextShark article or this time. Yeah. But yeah, and I think that's really it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so great. Sorry, NextShark. You just need to be better about your editorial.
Yeah, I get it.
So bad.
It's so bad.
Is there anything that you want to plug that's coming up for you?
Yeah, so I have, so I've been starting to do an all Asian like late night style show. It's called Night Market, and I have that show coming up on April 11th. Doors open at 9 at the Pit at People's Improv Theater. And yeah, and
I just performed there.
Oh yes, yeah, and it's under. So I have what I originally started was a stand-up comedy show, which I still do as well, which was all Asian show called Unwashed Comedy. So you can follow at Unwashed Comedy on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff, and you'll find all the event stuff for Night Market and Unwashed Comedy because I do it every month. So yeah, come out on April 11th because. So I usually have like 3 comics on. I'm going to have an interview with an actor named Stephen Lin. He's been on Master of None, Happy on Sci-Fi, and Mr. Robot. He's an awesome guy, and he's out there. He's grinding. He's out there doing it. And then I have a really awesome, I always have a music guest. I have a really awesome music guest. She is a Broadway singer. She was in School of Rock, and she's a good friend of mine, and she's going to come on and sing some songs that are absolutely going to wreck people, and I want people to come. Her name's Emily Baromeo. So yeah, I want people to start to come out to this one because it just includes a lot of different talents from a lot of different Asian Americans, and it's an awesome show.
That's great. And
Yeah.
where can people follow you and your personal handles?
So on my Instagram, I'm at Popski. I just shortened my name because it's easier to say, and some people, that's been my nickname. So it's EPOPSKI. That's at Instagram. That's the best way to, because again, I post stuff there. Yeah, that's where people can find me, and what other shows that I'm doing that aren't the Asian show that I produce, but just shows where I'm performing stand-up comedy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on Now in Color.
Thank you for having me. This is a great, and I'm getting more into podcasts, and this is a great one. And it's been great to do it.
That's amazing. So thank you so much for listening to Now in Color. You can find us anywhere that you get podcasts, and of course Now in Color podcast on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth. Before we end,
Yeah.
Edward.
Yes. Sandie.
Do you think about the underwear that you wear? Or your girlfriend, actually, in this case, because this is not for you.
Oh,
Maybe in
it's-
the future it could be for you.
It's what? It's for
for
women's?
women.
Oh,
It's
it's women's.
women's
Do
underwear.
I think about the underwear that my girlfriend wears?
Yeah.
I mean,
Her health?
sure. Her health.
Her vaginal health.
Oh, wow.
Did you know? Underwear can affect that.
Yeah. Yes, I do think about. Well, I think about her comfort overall. So yes, I
There
do
you
think about
go.
it. Certainly in the context of that, for sure.
Well, now Dylan Underwear is a panty made to empower women. Dylan is completely seamless and comfortable and is made to have you feel confident and sexy all day long. Made locally in New York by women for women. New styles are coming out this April, and you can sign up for the newsletter at dylanunderwear.com and follow them on Instagram at dylan_underwear for live updates.
That's cool. I can't wait for my girlfriend to ask me how the podcast went, and I go back to her and say, well, have you heard of Dylan Underwear? And
There
you
you
need to know.
go.
And she would actually enjoy that, because she does she likes when, obviously, like when we find like a business or something that she finds that's like run by women, because she like makes a bunch of stuff on her own too. So
Oh, that's amazing.
yeah, so she
Yeah.
will find that very like cool, and you know,
Yeah.
she would check it out for sure.
And the founder and producer, I guess, or maker, I don't know what fashion people are called. She's Asian American, so
okay.
yeah.
Wow, so even better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So check out Dylan Underwear, guys.
All right.
I'm also going to get a promo code as well.
Cool. I can't, promo codes are always so funny.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to what their promo code will be. There's always comedy there of what the promo code is.
Yes. Oh, and I forgot to say, this podcast is also presented by Brick by Brick Studios.
And it's a beautiful studio.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.